So I want to start with something, as I tend to do, y'all. I want to talk about the Ouija board, also commonly referred to as a spirit board or talking board. These devices use a heart-shaped planchette as a medium in ritual seances to attempt to speak with the dead or other such entities, and is a trademark of Hasbro, alongside such franchises as the Transformers and My Little Pony. The commercial introduction of the Ouija board was done by Elijah Bond in 1890 during the wake of the spiritualist movement, where people were really getting into that sort of thing. But it wasn't really popularized as a cult device. It was largely regarded, as the patent states, as a parlor game, a board game, nothing more, by Pearl Curran during World War I. Even Abraham Lincoln's wife tried to contact her kids and husband afterward during the spiritual movement. The idea of these boards being able to give you messages from the beyond, from spirits, has largely by science been written off as what's called ideomotor response, where basically you enter a dissociative state with what you're actually doing, and a subconscious action has you move the board, or the planchette on the thing, where people are actually not realizing that they're doing it because they're so focused on what the board's saying, they don't realize they're pushing the thing. They've actually been able to set up stuff and see that kind of brainwave activity on those. In fact, the name Ouija is actually just, while the guy who came up with the term, who worked for Bond, said it was an ancient Egyptian word that meant good luck. It's largely more likely and not as well recorded that he just took the French and German words for yes and put them together. Again, why bring it up? Why I brought it up, one, in this context, one, to demystify it, to bring it down a notch, as it were, so I could talk about it more frankly. One, but two, recently, Sherry and a coworker of hers, they clean houses. They were cleaning the house. It was October. Someone had a Ouija board out, most likely for decoration. They didn't. I don't think. Sherry's like, I don't even think they had the thing in it. And I went, the planchette. She went, whatever. But it was out for decoration, if nothing else. And her coworker was dusting and refused to pick the board up. Just kind of dusted around it, and Sherry went. I think Sherry said she went back later and picked it up and made sure she got it, because that's her job. I would posit to you all, and this is not on to discredit her. This is nothing against her or anything like that. But I would posit to you all that she nor it would have caught fire had she touched it. Nor would she have found herself in loss of control. And again, not to mock her, I will make this claim that the board is nothing more than wood, glue, and stain, no more or less than the podium I'm standing behind right now, despite the fact that it just has the alphabet and some numbers written on it. That being said, I pray no one thinks that I'm trying to tout that they should go play with one, that it's harmless. To name a couple, Leviticus 19:31, do not turn to mediums or necromancers, to cut that one to the point and short. Exodus 22:18, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. Galatians 5:19 through 21 has a whole list of stuff we ought not to be in, and sorcery is one of those. I think it's clear what the Bible and God's opinion, therefore, is of sorcery and these sorts of devices, generally against. But I would tell you that the Ouija board, in and of its own accord, has no power over you if you pick it up to dust underneath it. I would wager very little of what is out there in pop culture as far as fantasy and magic goes would have any power over you. I mentioned earlier, My Little Pony and even Transformers have magic and whatnot. And yeah, even not Transformers has magic, but I would even wager that if you wanted to point at what people have kind of written off as not a big deal, like they've kind of written off the Ouija board as not a big deal. Yeah, the My Little Pony has magic. Transformers, yeah, it's a sci-fi thing, but Transformers, you could say, is blasphemous in the way that the Transformers actually have their own mythology, where they have their own creators there, that they're sentient beings that God didn't create. Except in their mythology, that is provable because those guys show up every so often, and I have to fight them for because it's sci-fi comic book stuff. We tend to write off sci-fi as not being that dangerous or anything like that, but look at the modern superhero movies with the X-Men, the idea that we're just continuously evolving, becoming more than what God intended us to be. The idea that we can use science and our own ingenuity to break the limits of what God intended for us, to be able to achieve more without faith. It's why I personally, it's my biggest argument against luck, like luck charms and such like that, despite any ties to what it may have had to ritualism and occultism. Just the idea that there's a system out there where if I arrange certain things in a certain way or avoid certain things, luck goes my way. The idea that I can manipulate the universe to my favor without faith, without God. And that's just to play a little bit of devil's advocate there. There's a lot of stuff out there in fantasy that I would still recommend. The Chronicles of Narnia. While I have heard some people say that they shouldn't be messing with that, the Chronicles of Narnia were literally written by C.S. Lewis as a giant allegory for Jesus Christ. Aslan is Christ in every situation. You have to, yes, he is, Dad. No. Behave, Dad. There are scenes where people have to believe even though they don't see Aslan, but he's there. They have to believe that he will come from when they need him. Scenes where he gives his life for other people even though they're guilty. Where the devil of that series shows up and accuses him, and he says, nope, I'll pay the price. Lord of the Rings, despite not being an allegory, because Tolkien thought allegory was a little heavy-handed and actually advised his friend to C.S. Lewis against allegory, and C.S. Lewis was like, I'll do it anyway. Lord of the Rings still has a Christian basis in the idea that the evil in the world can't be removed. The bad guy, Sauron, comes back over and over again if you read through the mythologies of that, because at the end of the day, the world will not be pure again until its creator comes back to cleanse it. Stuff like Harry Potter, I would wager is harmless. Certainly not Christian. You can't learn magic from Harry Potter because it's mostly just bad Latin puns. There's one good pun, but mostly bad Latin puns in that whole book. Not that, and again, back and forth to weigh this back and forth. Not that there isn't danger being lost in these fantasies. There are people who do. They get into this Harry Potter stuff. They get into Dungeons and Dragons, and they believe in it way harder than they need to. That was the thing I told Jeremiah with when he had some Dungeons and Dragons manuals when he was real young. He wanted to look at them. I said, look, the minute you start thinking this is real, I'm torching these. They're gone. Right? It's just a fun game. It's all make-believe. It's whatever. There are people even these days that, I hope not these days, this is a few years back, but there were even forums on the internet where people believed in Digimon, that they'd seen Digimon being I know most people have heard of Pokemon, not as many have heard of Digimon, but the idea that there's some digital world where monsters occasionally sneak in. People talking, I was like, oh, I know, I saw one the other day. And it's real, and I was like, that's nuts. That people would get that into it, but people do because they're searching for something. But I would wager that nothing, Digimon, Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, what have you, at the end of the day, any of it is all, I don't want to say harmless, benign. No, benign's still not a great word. I don't think we should worry about it as much as we do sometimes. Romans 8:38-9. For I am convinced that neither death nor life, neither angels nor principalities, neither the present nor the future, nor any powers, Neither height nor depth nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. There's nothing out there that can take us away from Christ except us. First Corinthians 9:27. No, I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified. The Ouija board corrupts you only if you grant it that power. It is otherwise no more than wood and varnish. Touching it can't infect you with something, despite what the movies may have us believe. Only if you sit down to use it. Just because it is a parlor game, when we partake in it, we ourselves do open ourselves up to that corruption, though. Even if the rules of the board mean little, are relatively arbitrary to the people who made up the game, they'll work if you let them work, if you will believe in them. Because I will say, while we can trace exactly to where the board began, to where its original patent in 1890, certain systems of automatic writing have existed before, even back to the 12th century in China. So it's not unheard of. It wasn't that they made the idea up completely on their own. They were just the first to commercialize it. The board is harmless unless you let it, unless you partake. First Peter 5:8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, is a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. If you give him and the demons an opening, they'll take it if they think they can get to you with it. But did I come up here to really warn you guys about Ouija board? Is that a thing I thought you guys might be into? No, I wasn't concerned about that. But now's the part where I kind of flip it and I start talking metaphorically about the thing I've been running my mouth about for a while. Do you still have a metaphorical Ouija board sitting on your table that you refuse to move? Are we dogs turning back to our vomit? In the allegory, I want to talk about the idea of these vices and those sins that we're still struggling with, that we're dealing with. Do we turn back to them because of old habits, because of weakness, because we refuse to deal with the issue? Because we refuse to move the board off the table, to just get rid of the thing? This is especially important to clear the table when you consider that sometimes these vices, the metaphorical boards, are not our physical actions. Keep the Sabbath. Keep the holy days. Don't eat pork. Don't murder anybody. They're not our physical actions, but our attitudes, our mindsets, and our hearts. And I don't believe that's an opening we can afford to leave exposed to roaring lions. Especially because we don't always want to deal with those issues. We put it off. It's how I am. We kind of write things off sometimes. It's not as important. Just the way people write off these boards as not that big a deal. But if it's there, it's still something that we can partake in. We sometimes think our attitudes and our emotions aren't that bad, even if we're willing to admit that they're not quite polite enough to be drawing room. Well, they're probably not polite enough to be Christian either. Those habits that we turn back to. It's important to get rid of those attitudes and to change those mindsets. Because once we get that board off the table, there's a lot more room for a Bible, for a concordance, for any other study guide you might want, even if it's 55 more copies of the Bible open to each book, if you're crazy enough to think that's an option. If we're going to leave an opening in our hearts, let it be for the other lion in the Bible, one that shows light and spreads truth and healing, the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Let him in. Make room for him. Clear the table and let him in. Dust it off. Make sure it's clean for him. I mentioned before that there's only one good Latin pun in Harry Potter. Expecto Patronum. In the books, it produces a white light that protects you from life-draining spirits. And while it has story significance there as well, I will say here that it has some significance as well. Roughly translated in the Latin, I am looking out for the Father.